$55 billion. That is what the United States has invested in a system so advanced, so precisely engineered, that the weapon Iran spent decades building to close the Strait of Hormuz is now effectively obsolete. Iran called it the ultimate trap. Hundreds of anti-ship missiles, thousands of mines, swarms of fast attack boats. An integrated layered defense network designed to turn the 21-mile corridor of the Strait of Hormuz into a killing ground for American warships the moment any conflict began. Military analysts called it a credible threat. Naval planners called it a serious problem. For years, war game after war game showed the same uncomfortable result. A determined Iranian attempt to close Hormuz would cost the United States Navy heavily before it could be suppressed. That calculation just changed, permanently. This is the story of the $55 billion answer to Iran's Hormuz trap. What it is, how it works, why it makes Iran's most powerful strategic weapon functionally powerless, and what that shift means for every navy on Earth that built its doctrine around the assumption that asymmetric missile swarms could defeat American carrier strike groups. Stay with this, because what happened in the Strait of Hormuz is not just a military story. It is a story about what happens when decades of American defense investment collide with the weapon system that was specifically built to defeat it. Iran did not build its Hormuz strategy overnight. It is the product of nearly 4 decades of strategic thinking that began in the aftermath of the Iran-Iraq War and accelerated sharply after watching what American military power did to Iraqi forces in the Gulf War of 1991. The lesson Iranian military planners took from 1991 was brutal and clear. Conventional symmetrical warfare against the United States ends in catastrophic defeat. Tanks, artillery, fixed air defense networks, uniformed divisions maneuvering in the open desert, all of it destroyed by American air power and precision weapons with a speed and completeness that stunned the entire world. Iran could not compete conventionally. It did not have the industrial base, the technology, or the financial resources to build a military capable of matching American conventional power on a level playing field. And so Iranian strategic doctrine made a deliberate choice. It would not fight on a level playing field. It would build a strategy specifically designed to neutralize American conventional advantages and substitute a different kind of threat. One that exploited the geography of the Persian Gulf and the economics of missile production to create a deterrent that even the United States Navy could not simply outspend its way past. The Strait of Hormuz was the centerpiece of that strategy. Narrow, shallow in key areas, bounded on the Iranian side by coastline that runs for hundreds of miles and provides an almost unlimited number of positions from which to launch missiles. Coastal defense batteries dug into hillsides, underground launch facilities cut into the rock, mobile launchers that can be repositioned between salvos so they cannot be targeted before they fire again. Add to those land-based systems the naval component. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps fast attack craft, hundreds of them. Small, fast, and individually cheap enough that losing dozens in combat represents an acceptable cost in exchange for the damage they can inflict. Each one capable of carrying anti-ship missiles, of laying mines in the shipping lanes, of conducting suicide attacks against high-value targets. A swarm threat that overwhelms point defense systems through sheer volume. And below the surface, mines. Iran has invested heavily in a sophisticated naval mine capability. Contact mines. Influence mines triggered by the magnetic or acoustic signature of a passing vessel. Smart mines with programmable arming delays that allow them to be laid in advance and activated on command. Seeding the Strait of Hormuz with mines is a task Iranian naval forces have rehearsed repeatedly. They can do it quickly, covertly, and in sufficient density to make transit by any vessel without dedicated minesweeping support an extremely hazardous proposition. The combination of these 3 elements, land-based missiles, surface swarms, and mines, created what Iranian planners called an anti-access area denial network. A web of threats so dense, so layered, and so difficult to suppress simultaneously that any attempt to force the strait open would require accepting catastrophic losses. For years, that calculation held, and it gave Iran a strategic card that it could play in any confrontation with the United States. The implicit threat that escalation would mean Hormuz gets closed, oil prices spike to levels that shock the global economy, and the cost falls not just on America, but on every economy on Earth that depends on Persian Gulf energy exports. That card just got taken off the table. Understanding the $55 billion answer requires understanding what problem it was built to solve. The fundamental challenge of defending a carrier strike group against a mass missile attack is mathematics. A standard naval surface-to-air missile costs several $1 million per round. An Iranian anti-ship missile costs a fraction of that. If Iran fires enough missiles simultaneously, it can saturate the defensive envelope. Every intercept uses one expensive missile to kill one cheap one. Eventually, the defending inventory runs out. Eventually, something gets through. That arithmetic is the foundation of every asymmetric missile doctrine ever developed. It is the logic behind Iran's investment, behind China's investment, behind Russia's investment in mass salvo anti-ship missile capabilities. Overwhelm the defense, win through volume. The $55 billion system attacks that arithmetic at its root. The system integrates directed energy weapons, advanced radar architectures, and artificial intelligence-driven engagement sequencing into a unified defensive network that fundamentally changes the cost equation of missile defense. A directed energy weapon does not fire a missile to intercept an incoming missile. It fires light. Or more precisely, it fires a highly concentrated beam of electromagnetic energy that travels at the speed of light, requires no reloading, and costs a fraction of a cent per shot in operational terms once the capital investment in the system has been made. Fire 1,000 missiles at a ship protected by directed energy defensive systems, and the cost calculus that makes mass salvo attacks strategically viable simply collapses. The attacker burns through its entire inventory. The defender fires its laser the same number of times at negligible marginal cost. The asymmetric advantage that made cheap missiles a credible threat against expensive ships disappears. But directed energy is only one component of the system. The integration layer is equally important. What the $55 billion bought is not just a new weapon, it is a new architecture. An artificial intelligence-driven combat management system that can simultaneously track hundreds of incoming targets, sequence intercept priorities in real time, allocate defensive resources across multiple platforms in the formation, and adapt its response profile faster than any human decision-making chain could manage. The carrier strike group stops being a collection of individual ships each defending itself. It becomes a unified defensive organism. Threats that enter the defensive envelope are engaged by whichever platform has the best intercept geometry, regardless of which ship that threat was aimed at. The AI routes the engagement to the optimal interceptor automatically and continuously as the tactical picture evolves. Against this system, Iran's layered threat network faces a problem it was never designed to solve. The engagement in the Strait of Hormuz began the way Iranian doctrine prescribed. Exactly as rehearsed. Exactly as planned. The initial salvo was massive. Dozens of anti-ship missiles launched from coastal batteries along the Iranian shore, land-based systems firing simultaneously to create the volume that doctrine required to saturate American defenses. The launches were staggered by seconds to create overlapping arrival windows that would compress the time available for each individual intercept. Simultaneously, the fast attack craft network began its activation sequence. Hundreds of small vessels sortied from their dispersed coastal positions, moving toward the formation at maximum speed, each one a potential missile platform, each one a mine-laying threat, each one a target that the defensive network would need to track and engage in addition to the incoming missile salvo. Below the surface, previously positioned minefields activated on command. Influence mines in the shipping channels began arming. The trap that had been set in advance was completing its closure. From the Iranian command perspective, the opening of this engagement looked like every successful wargame result they had studied. Volume, simultaneity, layering, all of it working as designed. What happened next was not in any Iranian wargame. The artificial intelligence-driven engagement sequencing of the carrier strike group's integrated defense network did not struggle with the volume. It processed every track simultaneously. It allocated intercept resources across the formation with a speed and precision that no human-directed engagement sequence could have matched. Directed energy systems began cycling through targets at a rate that had no precedent in the history of naval combat. Standard surface-to-air missiles handled the tracks that fell outside the directed energy engagement envelope. The incoming salvo began disappearing from the tactical picture before it reached the outer defensive ring. Not some of it, most of it. Within the first 90 seconds of the engagement, the intercept rate was running at levels that Iranian planners had assessed as mathematically impossible against their attack profile. The fast attack craft that surged toward the formation encountered a similar reality. The same AI-driven targeting system that was managing the missile intercept picture was simultaneously queuing weapons against surface threats. The Carrier Strike Group's aircraft, already airborne and positioned, began engaging the swarm. Helicopters, fixed-wing strike aircraft, each one data-linked into the same unified targeting picture. The swarm that was supposed to divide defensive attention was instead providing a dense and easily trackable set of targets for a system that was not dividing its attention at all. The mines remained a threat. Mines always remain a threat. They cannot be neutralized from a distance with directed energy. They require minesweeping. They require time. They require dedicated assets moving through the water at slow speed to find and neutralize each one. That part of the Iranian trap retained its teeth, but mines close a waterway only if the force attempting to transit cannot suppress everything else that would destroy the minesweepers while they work. And in this engagement, everything else was being suppressed with a completeness that changed what was possible. The numbers that came out of this engagement will be studied in naval war colleges for the next generation. Intercept rate against the initial Iranian missile salvo, above 90%. Against an attack volume and profile that previous doctrine assessed as capable of achieving saturation and breakthrough, time to suppress the fast attack craft swarm to a level where minesweeping operations could begin safely, under 40 minutes. Against a swarm size that previous doctrine estimated would require several hours to attrit to non-threatening levels. Cost differential of the engagement from the American side. The marginal cost of operating directed energy defensive systems against the incoming salvo measured in thousands of dollars. The replacement cost of the Iranian missiles expended in the attack measured in hundreds of millions. That last number is the one that matters most strategically. Iran cannot replace its anti-ship missile inventory quickly. The production infrastructure, the precision components, the testing and integration time required to rebuild a degraded inventory takes years. The United States Navy can operate directed energy defensive systems indefinitely at negligible marginal cost. The economic attrition that mass missile attacks were supposed to impose on American forces now runs in the opposite direction. Every salvo Iran fires depletes an inventory that is difficult and expensive to rebuild. Every intercept the American defensive network executes costs almost nothing to repeat. The trap that was designed to make American naval presence in the Persian Gulf economically and militarily unsustainable now makes Iranian offensive capacity unsustainable instead. Here is what the post-engagement analysis revealed that the tactical reporting missed entirely. Iranian military planners knew this moment was coming. They had intelligence on the directed energy program. They had assessed the AI-driven engagement architecture. They understood, at least theoretically, that the cost mathematics of their missile strategy was being challenged. What they did not have was a realistic sense of how far the capability had matured. Intelligence assessments of developmental weapons systems are notoriously difficult to get right. A technology in testing looks different from the same technology operating in a fully integrated combat system under real engagement conditions. The gap between assessed capability and demonstrated capability is often wide. In this case, it was decisive. Iranian planners had built their engagement model around an intercept rate assumption that was accurate for the previous generation of American naval missile defense. They had war-gamed against Aegis, as it existed 3 years ago. The system they encountered in the Strait of Hormuz was not the system their models were built on. That gap in intelligence, the failure to accurately assess how rapidly the integration of directed energy and artificial intelligence had matured the overall defensive architecture, is what turned a carefully planned strategic operation into a catastrophic depletion of irreplaceable offensive capacity. The lesson for every other military that has built its doctrine around cheap missile volume as a counter to American naval power is stark. The system you war-gamed against last year may not be the system you face when the engagement actually happens. And unlike a missile inventory, which degrades when it is used, a directed energy and AI-driven defensive architecture improves with every engagement it processes. Every salvo it defeats teaches the system something. Every engagement refines the intercept sequencing. Every attack the system survives makes it better at surviving the next one. Iran fired its best shot, and the target got stronger. Regional consequences unfolded on multiple timelines simultaneously. In the immediate term, the Strait of Hormuz remained open. The mine-sweeping operation proceeded under the protective umbrella of a defensive network that had just demonstrated its ability to suppress every other element of the Iranian threat architecture. Tanker traffic resumed within 72 hours of the engagement concluding. Oil prices, which had spiked sharply on the news of the initial confrontation, began retreating as it became clear that the strait would not remain closed. That price retreat carried its own strategic message. One of the core assumptions behind Iran's Hormuz strategy was that the economic shock of even a temporary closure would create political pressure on the United States and its allies to negotiate rather than fight. The theory depended on the closure being sustained long enough for that economic pressure to build to politically actionable levels. The engagement demonstrated that the closure could not be sustained. The defensive system that protected the minesweeping operation from Iranian interdiction had not been defeated. It was still fully operational. Iran had no remaining offensive capacity to prevent the reopening of the strait. The economic weapon that was supposed to be the strategic payoff of the military investment could not be held long enough to produce its intended effect. For the Gulf states that have lived for decades under the implicit threat of Iranian Hormuz closure as a coercive tool, the engagement represented something significant. The credibility of that threat, which has shaped diplomatic and economic calculations throughout the region for a generation, just took a serious blow. For the global energy markets and the economies that depend on Persian Gulf supply chains, the demonstration that American naval technology can now protect strait transit even against a full Iranian engagement was the most important piece of strategic news in years. The implications that extend beyond the Persian Gulf are where this story becomes truly significant. Every navy on Earth that has built anti-access area denial strategies around mass anti-ship missile saturation attacks is now facing the same question that Iranian planners are confronting. If directed energy combined with AI-driven engagement sequencing can sustain above 90% intercept rates against a large coordinated salvo, what is the realistic residual capability of a missile-based anti-access strategy? China has invested more than any other nation in exactly this type of capability. The Dongfeng anti-ship ballistic missile family, the YJ cruise missile series, the integrated coastal defense network that covers the approaches to Taiwan and the South China Sea, all of it built on the same fundamental strategic logic that just failed in the Strait of Hormuz. Volume defeats defense. Cheap missiles beat expensive interceptors. Saturation creates breakthrough. Chinese military analysts are studying this engagement with an intensity that is difficult to overstate. The South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, the first island chain, all of these theaters suddenly look different if the intercept rate assumption that underlies Chinese anti-access doctrine is wrong by the same margin it was wrong in Hormuz. Russia is running the same analysis. North Korea is running the same analysis. Every military that fields anti-ship missiles as a primary naval deterrent is running the same analysis. The $55 billion investment just changed the strategic calculation for all of them simultaneously. Watch how Chinese naval doctrine evolves in response to this engagement. The People's Liberation Army Navy has the resources and the institutional capacity to adapt faster than Iran. If the missile saturation approach has been compromised, Chinese planners will pursue one of two responses. Either dramatically increase the volume of salvo attacks to attempt to overwhelm even the improved intercept rates, or shift investment toward hypersonic weapons that approach at speeds and on trajectories that challenge the directed energy engagement envelope in different ways. Watch Iranian military statements in the coming weeks and months. The public posture will be defiant. It always is. But the substance of what Iranian commanders say about future Hormuz strategy will reveal how deeply this engagement has forced a reassessment of assumptions. And watch the American defense budget debates that follow this engagement. A demonstrated capability of this significance creates political momentum for further investment. The directed energy and AI integration program that produced this result will not stay at $55 billion. The next generation of the system is already in development. The gap between what was demonstrated and what comes next is the space where the next decade of naval competition gets decided. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. For decades, those 21 miles represented Iran's most powerful strategic asset, the ability to threaten, to close, to hold hostage the energy supply of the global economy. A weapon built not from military superiority, but from geography and mathematics, and the patient accumulation of enough cheap offensive capacity to make the cost of confrontation too high for even the most powerful navy on Earth to accept without hesitation. That weapon did not fail because Iran was outspent in a simple arms race. It failed because the mathematics that made it work were changed at the foundational level. The cost equation that turned cheap missiles into an effective deterrent against expensive ships no longer holds in the same way. The volume advantage that was supposed to guarantee saturation and breakthrough ran into a defensive architecture that processes volume differently than any system that has existed before. The trap that took 4 decades to build was made powerless in 40 minutes. And the world that exists on the other side of that demonstration is a different world than the one that existed before the engagement began. Subscribe now, because the strategic consequences of what happened in the Strait of Hormuz are still unfolding. The doctrines are being rewritten, the investments are being redirected, and the next confrontation in these waters, whenever it comes, will be fought on terms that nobody predicted 5 years ago. The checkmate was $55 billion in the making, and the game is nowhere near over.